Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. This is John Littoral, host of JohnLittoral.com. This is part 7 of the audio version that I'm doing on my book called Confessions of a Free-Thinking Christian. And in this section, this is called The Church. As mentioned above, I spent over 2 decades faithfully going to church. And the different types of churches I went to understands the purpose and practice and worship quite differently. Catholic and Orthodox are sacramental and liturgical churches, while the Southern Baptist denomination that I was a member of for 10 years was not. In the Southern Baptist Church worship services, it was usually centered around the sermon preached by a preacher. Services usually started off with some songs being sang by the congregation and the choir. Perhaps there would be some announcements during the service, and then the sermon would usually come to the conclusion of the service. Pious Baptists usually believe that going to church is very important, but they don't have the same perspective as found in Catholicism and Orthodoxy, where the doctrine of going to Mass is binding, and if you miss Mass without a good reason, then that is considered a mortal sin, meaning it can result in falling out of the state of grace and send you to hell. Baptists usually see someone missing lots of church as being a backslider, and for those who believe the doctrine of once in grace and always in grace, they will look at a backslider as one who probably didn't really have salvation in the first place. I always felt that those who believed in once in grace, always in grace, actually agreed with those who believe that you can lose your salvation, but they just found ways to spin it and articulate it to sound different in order to push their pet doctrine. Therefore, if a perceived quote-unquote saved person quits going to church, then many of the once in grace, always in grace advocates will say that they didn't really have salvation in the first place. Catholic and Orthodox worship services are liturgical and sacramental. The services are not centered around the sermon like that of a Baptist service, but the Mass is centered around the liturgy and the Eucharist, often called the Lord's Supper. They believe that the Eucharist is where the bread and wine become transformed into literally the body and blood of Christ. And I heard it said that it helps you become what you eat, that is, Christ-like. The liturgy is the public worship, and it is believed to play a vital role that continues the work of our redemption in, with, and through His church. It is seen as an exercise of priestly office of Jesus. It involves the presentation of man's sanctification under the guise of signs perceptible by the senses, and its accomplishment in ways appropriate to each of those signs, which is found in the Catechism of the Catholic Church, paragraphs 1069 through 1070. They believe that it is God's invisible graces working through invisible means. I remember that prior to converting to Catholicism, I was attracted to the liturgical concept because going to church was not giving me that connection to God that I was told that it was supposed to do. Like I mentioned above, going to church was a struggle for me because I never felt like I fit in, and I would always leave church not feeling any closer to God than before I entered the doors. The concept of liturgy and sacraments did sound like an actual purpose to go, because it was not about going to sing hymns and listen to a preacher share information that I myself was learning on my own, but it was about receiving something that I myself could not duplicate on my own. That resonated with me because I saw that there was an actual purpose to go to church. But as I have described above, I spent over a decade faithfully attending Mass, and even though I believed with all my heart that I was doing God's will and receiving the body and blood of Christ, it never fed me with the fullness of God as it was claimed it was supposed to do. In other words, I never left Mass feeling any closer to God than when I entered the doors. It was not for a lack of trying. I can see how going to Mass can be very beneficial to those who don't spend much time researching and studying their faith, because Catholic and Orthodox liturgy is very repetitious, and there are lots of scripture and traditional beliefs that are constantly being uttered during Mass. Therefore, attendees are learning their religious creeds and dogmas during every Mass service. You actually participate and repeat creeds every service, and those creeds become ingrained in your brain. A tremendous amount of scripture is read and uttered by the congregation during Mass, and I have always thought it was ridiculous when people would say that they never hear scripture in a Catholic Mass. But like I mentioned, after years of going to Mass, just like going to a Baptist church, it never helped me feel closer to God, and I always felt closer to God on my own. Again, let me repeat, I am not suggesting this for others, because I believe it is up to each and every one of us to seek for ourselves what actually brings us closer to God and come to our own conclusions. I do believe that Jesus established his church, but as I have demonstrated in this book, I believe that he did not establish institutionalized Christianity. Institutionalized Christianity is the creation of man, and there are many faces to it. Institutionalized Christianity often pretends to have a monopoly on God's will, and it is used to control the masses. Oftentimes, the different so-called Christian institutions are nothing more than Hegelian dialectics. That is, they are pitted off in opposition to one another by those for those looking to create a thesis versus antithesis to equal synthesis. It is a divide and rule technique that is an ancient geopolitical model and strategy to ensure that the masses are never unified, and they are led to believe that those who should be their allies have the perception that they are their enemies, therefore not recognizing that the true enemy is the one, powers that be, that are manipulating all sides. In my book called Handbook on the Powers That Should Not Be, I wrote about the Illuminati and how they use this Hegelian dialectic to divide the world population by creating geopolitical ideologies. The Illuminati did this by creating communism in order to pit it against capitalism, while controlling both. This allowed them to divide the world in order to create wars. Capitalist nations created the wealth to develop the New World Order police state with all the technology and weaponry, and the communists not only established centralized power in those countries that it was enforced, but it was covertly used to infiltrate capitalist countries like the United States through education and the political landscapes. This is now manifested into the result that they have wanted, that is, the New World Order global government. In other words, capitalism was the thesis, communism was the antithesis, and the New World Order one world government is the synthesis, which is the desired outcome. The same kind of technique is also used to control religious institutions by the same powers that be who have controlled the political landscape. In my last book, called The Antichrist and His Cult, I gave numerous examples of Christian denominations and institutions that were either hijacked or created by the Illuminatis, which is the powers that be. When one does the research, they will find that many of these so-called Christian institutions were created by the funding of the Illuminati bankers. Big-name television evangelists and megachurch pastors are oftentimes agents and have memberships to infamous cult-created organizations like the Council on Foreign Relations. It has been exposed many times where so-called ministries would do quote-unquote mission work under the guise of spreading the gospel, but it would be CIA operations to spread propaganda or to spy. This is why I highly suggest anyone to do some independent research and find out where the Christian denomination and institution that you may be a part of or are considering to join, and to find out whether it was bankrolled and founded or for geopolitical purposes, because there is a shockingly large amount of mainstream Christian denominations and institutions that are tied to big Illuminati money. The church that Christ established was not institutionalized. It is the body of believers united in Jesus Christ. The word Christian simply means a follower of Christ. The church is made up of many followers of Christ and are united spiritually. No church building or cathedral makes any difference whatsoever. We are scattered here on earth, but we have the same destination, and we will be united in a more significant way after we leave our body. Being a Christian does not necessarily mean that we all share the same creed or interpretations. We all are in different stages in our relationship with God, which means that some are in the beginning stages where our understanding and knowledge is at a minimum. As we learn and grow in our faith, as we should, then our understanding grows. I believe that it is important to continually seek to grow in our relationship with God through prayer and study. Some people are more bent on higher levels of thinking, and they are self-driven to learn more all the time. Some people are simply not bent that way, but that's okay because sometimes those with less inclination to do deep thinking and learning can be the most holy and do more spiritual works that actually please God the most. I learned this lesson many years ago when I had been studying the Bible for a number of years. I was so passionate about learning the Bible and I studied it continually. I found that within a few years I had learned more about the Bible than many people who had been going to church their whole lives. One day I was having a conversation with a young lady who grew up in church and in a family who were devout Christians. I assumed that she might know more about the Bible than I did, but as we were talking, I discovered that I knew quite a bit more than her. She even admitted that she knew less about the Bible than I did. I remembered how that made me feel for a moment that I was on a different level than her. But as I got to know her better, I found that she had been doing mission work for years and helped the needy and less fortunate. This was a great lesson for me because when I compared the difference that she had made in the world to what little difference I had made in the world, even though I could quote more Bible verses, I felt quite inferior after having a temporary superiority trip boasting in my knowledge. I realized that knowledge is good, but there are other things that God finds much more valuable. The Apostle Paul was truly correct when he said in 1 Corinthians chapter 8, verses 1 through 3, "Knowledge puffs up, but love edifies. And if anyone thinks that he knows anything, he knows nothing as yet as he ought to know. But if anyone loves God, this one is known by him." What makes us the church is our faith in Jesus Christ. Not that we all share the exact same points of view. We are all at different levels of understanding the ways of God. But God knows our hearts, and we will ultimately be judged by Him based upon that. Many of us have had different journeys to get to where we are at spiritually, and we all will continue to be on our own journey. But as long as we all are honestly seeking the truth and trying to do what is right, then I cannot imagine how God could be disappointed with that. The church is the body of believers, not from a particular Christian denomination, but scattered throughout all denominations and beyond. Even in the most infiltrated and Illuminati co-opted congregation, it is possible for even misled people to have a heart for God, even though they may have a distorted understanding of Him, because God sees the heart and knows and understands. Not that we all should not try to help people to understand the dangers of the congregation that they are a part of, because we should. We should share information to help clarify and therefore letting them come to their own conclusions. And that is the conclusion of this part. And I will pick up to the next part in my next audio version. And that section will start off with the sin factor. And then I will also talk about, or I'll also read the section called God-Given Liberty. So, folks, if you want this book for free, just click on the link in the description box below. You can get a free PDF, or you can order the book for, I think, somewhere around $5. So check it out, folks. I appreciate you. Take care. Have a good day.